Hey everyone, in this video I am continuing on with my John Constantine Hellblazer coverage by Garth Ennis. This volume is called Bloodlines and it spans issues 47 through 61, which is 15 issues, so we are going through a lot in this one. There's a lot of one-shots and two-parters, and there are some longer story arcs as well. The longer ones involve this storyline called Royal Blood, which has to do with the heir to the British throne being possessed by a demon, and John has to be brought in to save the day. That one is really fun. We're going to also be introduced to the King of the Vampires, another one of John's big villains, and the rivalry between John and the First of the Fallen is going to be furthered. We saw some of that in the Dangerous Habits story arc, so we're building from there. All right, let's dive into it. Volume 6. Hellblazer Volume 6, Bloodlines, written by Garth Ennis, art by William Simpson, Steve Dillon, Sean Phillips, David Lloyd, Mike Hoffman, and John Smith. This volume covers issues 47 through 61. Hellblazer, issue 47, The Pub Where I Was Born. There was a pub in Camden called the Northampton Arms. It was a great pub, the pillar of the community, beloved by all. The pub was ran by a married couple named Freddie and Laura Collins. The two of them ran the pub for years. And one day, Freddie died of old age. And Laura, she was sad, but not that sad. Before Freddie died, he promised his wife, "I'll never leave you alone, Laura. I'll always be here to look after you. And this place. I'll stay." So Laura continued running the pub for many years, and her husband kept her company as a ghost. Fast forward now to the current day. Laura Collins, an old woman now, still runs the pub, and her husband as a ghost still keeps her company. The pub is owned by a man named Mr. Carson. Mr. Carson wants to sell the pub to a man named Marcus Quincy, and the two of them have a little scheme they're going to run. Mr. Carson has hired a tough guy named Joe Hollis to burn the pub to the ground so that he can collect the insurance money, and then Marcus can take over. Elsewhere, we see John Constantine. He is talking to his friend Kit Ryan. Kit Ryan, ages ago, used to date John's other friend, Brandon Finn, and the two of them connected recently over Brandon's death. John and Kit seem to slowly start exploring a potential romantic relationship between the two of them, although none of them have acted on their feelings yet. The two of them make plans to meet later on at the Northampton Arms pub, which happens to be John's favorite pub in the area. John is first going to play some cards with his friend Jazz Chandler, and then Kit is going to come by later, and the two of them will hang out there. Later on at the Northampton Arms pub, John walks in and talks to Laura Collins, who is running the place. John and Laura exchange some kind words, and then John goes to the back to play poker with Chaz and some of Chaz's co-workers. After a few hours of gambling and drinking, John manages to beat them all in poker and clean them out. Despite John winning, everyone is pretty good-natured about it. They all discuss rumors that the Northampton pub is potentially up for sale and that Laura may be ousted soon. The men also speak of rumors that Mr. Carson sent a guy named Joe Hollis to convince Laura to give up the place without a fight. They also share a rumored story that Joe Hollis is kind of insane after having his genitals burnt off when he pissed onto the third rail of a tube track years ago. So ever since then, he's kind of had a death wish. He's a nutter. Later on, Kit Ryan finally arrives at the pub, and her and John talk and drink. The two of them drink pretty heavily, but Kit can handle her liquor, at least far better than John. And at the end of the night, when John is really trashed, Kit manages to get John back home. Outside of the pub in a car, Mr. Carson and Marcus Quincy are discussing their plans to have Joe Hollis burn the pub down so that Carson can collect the insurance money. Quincy is a little worried that he's getting in a little too deep, but Carson assures him that Joe Hollis is a professional. Back inside the pub, once everyone is cleared out, Laura is alone, and she is talking to the ghost of her husband, Freddie. Laura, she starts crying as Joe Hollis threatened her earlier. Laura says to her husband, "He said I had to get out tonight. Oh, Freddie, it's obvious. They're going to do the pub, aren't they? Carson must have sold it to some bloke who only wants the land, and he's doing the demolition on the cheap." The ghost of Freddie replies, "I know, it just makes me so angry, Laura, but there's nothing I can do. I've stayed here to be with you and help you, and that's all I'm allowed. And if you stand up to someone like Hollis, you'll really get hurt." Laura is worried, though, that if the pub burns down, what will happen to Freddie? Freddie responds, "I'll just have to move on somewhere else, I suppose. But I'll never forget you, love. I'll think of you always. I love you, Laura." Laura responds, "I love you too." Soon after, Joe Hollis and his men break into the pub, and they prepare to set it ablaze. Joe threatens Laura and calls her stupid for not clearing out earlier. Laura tries to stand up for herself in the pub, but Joe just smacks her down to the ground, and then him and his goons light the place on fire and exit. After being knocked out, Laura eventually starts waking up, and when she wakes up, most of her pub is engulfed in flames. Laura, she tries to make her way to the door, but she gets caught up in an explosive backdraft, and it burns her alive. Laura is now dead too. Freddie tells the ghost of his wife now, "I'm here, Laura. I'm with you. Just let go, love. It's all over now." But it wasn't over at all. Laura and Freddie were dead, and the Northampton Arms was gone, but this was just the beginning. Hellblazer issue 48, Love Kills. As the Northampton Arms pub is engulfed in flames, Laura Collins' spirit watches over her own charred remains, realizing that she has been murdered. Her husband Freddie, who is already a ghost, welcomes and comforts her into the afterlife. Their love and their pub have been reduced to ashes, and the two of them demand justice. The next morning, John Constantine wakes up on Kit Ryan's couch, too hungover to remember how he got there. Kit, ever the pragmatic one, had dragged him back to her place, enlisting a cabbie to help dump John on the couch. Fresh out of the shower now, Kit offers John a turn in the shower while she makes breakfast. Once Kit heads to work, John finds himself nursing lunch at a diner, mulling over whether he should abandon his reckless ways. Maybe even settle down with Kit, if she'd have him. But before he can entertain the thought any further, John's old friend Chaz Chandler storms in, clearly distressed. Chaz tells John that the Northampton Arms burned down last night, and Laura Collins, the manager, was likely inside. A sobering reminder that even if John stops chasing trouble, trouble will always find him. At the charred remains of the pub, John, he suspects an insurance scam orchestrated by Mr. Carson. Chaz is uneasy about John's involvement, but John warns him this will get ugly. The cops offer little help. John, he sifts through the rubble. He senses something lingering in the ashes. John is not sure what it is, but it is actually Laura and Freddie Collins as ghosts. But John, he just senses an energy that was once pure, now twisted. John, he spends the day shaking down an informant named Lenny Fisher. He asks Lenny about Joe Hollis's henchman. The informant, Lenny, finally coughs up two names, Adele Carter and a Tony McKay, associates of Joe. Meanwhile, we see this Dell and Tony are laying low watching TV, when Dell suddenly falls silent. Without warning, he picks up a shotgun and blasts Tony's brains out. John, then hearing the shot, rushes in, only to witness Dell in a trance, shoving a shard of glass into his own throat. Horrified, John flees. Trying to drown the nightmare in alcohol of what he just witnessed, John becomes ambushed by one of Hollis's remaining goons. This goon assumes that John was behind the killings of his friends. This thug has John outmatched until Kit shows up, proving her mettle by squeezing the balls of the goon into submission. Under duress, the goon spills that Hollis and Carson are dealing with a man named Quincy, ensuring Quincy's silence about the fire. At that moment elsewhere, Carson has this Joe Hollis threaten this Quincy. Hollis tells a story of what happened to the previous guy that backed out of a deal. Hollis says, "I threw him in the bath with an electric heater, and I threw his whore in on top of him, and his daughters. They were twins, 9 years old." This story causes Quincy to tear up in fear. This guy killed 9-year-old girls? Oh man. Carson is now satisfied that Quincy won't talk about the arson. Although Joe Hollis soon starts becoming possessed. Laura Collins is seeping her way inside of him. Joe, realizing what is happening, says, "Ah, you whore, get out and take your friggin' husband with you. Get out of me." Joe Hollis, now fully possessed, suddenly turns on Carson and rips him apart with his bare hands, and then he force feeds him his own organs until he suffocates. John arrives just in time to find them both dead, and seeing this Marcus Quincy guy there paralyzed with fear. John, he senses Laura and Freddy's presence again, and their thirst for vengeance nearly fulfilled. But John warns the ghosts that if she and Freddy continue down this path and kill more people, they'll doom themselves to hell. Instead of spilling more blood, John convinces them to let Marcus Quincy here go. Let him atone by perhaps funding a new Northampton Arms pub and rebuilding and restoring it to what it once was. And Freddy and Laura can continue to look after it, just like always. Freddy and Laura's anger subsides. They are finally now at peace, and they move on. As John leaves, outside he finds Kit, and Kit and John silently walk home. Hellblazer issue 49, Lord of the Dance. It is approaching Christmas time, and John Constantine spends the day wandering Camden in search of the perfect Christmas gift for Kit Ryan. Something that not only expresses how he feels about her, but also convinces her that he's worth considering as a lover. But despite his efforts, nothing seems right. And if that weren't frustrating enough, John soon realizes he's being followed by a ghost. This ghost radiates misery. John, ever the charmer, confronts him directly. John says to the ghost, "Cheer up, son. Don't you like Christmas?" The ghost admits that he doesn't like Christmas at all. In fact, he hates Christmas. The ghost is intrigued by John's ability to perceive him, so the ghost invites John for some tea. Over their conversation, the ghost reveals that his resentment of Christmas stems from the old carol, The Lord of the Dance, originally a pagan song celebrating life, revelry, and the winter solstice. However, the tune was repurposed by a Christian missionary in the 1960s, who rewrote the lyrics to glorify Jesus. This ghost knows this all too well because he was the Lord of the Dance from that pagan song. Before Christianity took hold in Britain, the people honored the solstice with feasting, singing, drinking, and uninhabited festivities, and the Lord of the Dance would appear among the people, leading the celebration in a joyous affirmation of life. But then the Christian monks who condemned these traditions as sinful replaced the old ways with Christmas, replaced the alehouses with churches, replaced merrymaking with mass, and the pagans turned away, and so too did the Lord of the Dance. And yet in his absence, the monks couldn't leave him alone, so they erased him from history, making him the ghost of Christmas Never. Hearing this story, John sympathizes with the ghost, but insists that he's being too defeatist. To prove John's point, John takes the ghost to a nearby pub, where they meet up with John's friend, Chaz Chandler. Drinks flow that night, and stories are shared and songs are sung, and by the end of the night, everyone is really drunk, especially Chaz. Chaz is drunk off of his ass. And then John, he makes the point to the ghost that even though it's Christmas today, After a few pints of beer, no one gives a shit about what Christmas means anyway. Once you're drunk enough, Christmas stops mattering. They all continue to drink long into the night, and John and the ghost drag Chaz back home to his very grumpy wife. She is pissed at what a bad state Chaz is in. With the night wrapping up, John bids the ghost farewell, and the ghost is grateful to have been reminded of his place still in the world. When John returns back to Kit Ryan for the night, he realizes that he forgot to buy her a gift, and he apologizes profusely to her, only to find that Kit didn't buy John a gift either. Kit, she didn't need a gift, but she smirks, and she warns John to never leave her alone on Christmas again. And then she yanks him closer by his tie and gives him a kiss. John is a little surprised, as this is their first kiss they've ever had. Afterwards, she wishes John a Merry Christmas. Hellblazer issue 50, Remarkable Lives. John Constantine and Kit Ryan, now having formed a romantic relationship, have spent nearly 3 blissful days together in bed, before John finally gets up this day, only to be met with a grisly sight in the bathroom. Someone has filled the sink with dead birds and scrawled Hampstead Heath on the mirror in blood. Hampstead Heath is the name of a park in Camden. Whoever sent this message to John wants him to meet there. John keeps this discovery discreet. He cleans up the mess, and then he throws on his jacket and heads to the park. Upon arrival at the park, John quickly senses supernatural forces lurking in the shadows. John's brave face fades as he is led to a grove where the King of Vampires awaits to meet him. This ancient being predates mankind itself. His first human victim is rumored to be the first man. The dead birds were his way of summoning John, an invitation, albeit a dramatic one. Despite Constantine's insistence that he's just an unlucky bloke caught up in supernatural chaos, the King of Vampires sees John as one of the most remarkable occult figures alive. John scoffs at this idea, distancing himself from other costumed occultist mystics like Dr. Fate or Baron Winters. Unlike them, John, he barely scrapes by. His every attempt at heroism leads to suffering. 14 years ago, John failed a little girl named Astrologue. He tried to rescue her from hell, only to escape with nothing but her severed hand. Meanwhile, the King of Vampires in the past spent his existence indulging in orgies of blood and power, while John's life has been a cycle of trauma, from the Newcastle disaster to his time in the Ravenscar Mental Hospital where he was beaten nightly for a crime no one could understand. The vampire, in contrast, had thrived, feasting on the dead in various battlefields. Yet for all of his power, the vampire acknowledges John's cunning. After all, John once tricked Satan himself. The King of Vampires finally prepares to reveal his true purpose for their meeting, but they're interrupted. A night watchman spies on them from a distance, and the King of Vampires notices this man. So the King of Vampires makes a gruesome display of his brutality. He grabs the night watchman, splits his skull open, and drains him dry. This display confirms John's suspicions that whatever this vampire wants, it won't be good. Finally, the vampire makes an offer to John, the whole reason why John is here. The vampire says, "I want you to work for me." John quips, "Work for you? What, as a blood donor?" The vampire tells John that he wants him to be a gatherer of knowledge, so you can tell me when the various players in the magical game plan their moves against me, so that I can strike first. They all know you and what you've done, but they'd never suspect you were with me as my spy. John has no interest in being a spy for this vampire. The vampire offers John the ability to know what it is like to be him, to be given the powers that he has. The vampire says, "Work for me. Bring me your reports on the others, and soon, when you've seen what my life is like, you'll start to want yours to be the same, and I'll happily make it that way. Come on, John." We can do great things together. We can forge something new and dark and beautiful, and those idiots will never stop us with their bloody, foolish magic. There's a whole world out there, and I'm hungry." John responds, "If you're so hungry, why don't you just eat shit?" The vampire is aghast. He says, "What?" John reiterates, "You heard. Jesus, that's going to be the worst job offer ever. Look, I don't want to be some friggin' Superman John Constantine, servant of the Dark One. For Christ's sake, I mean, you'll be wanting me to wear a podsy hood and start waving a magic wand next." The vampire, referring to some of the other magic users in the DC universe, says, "But if you hate those idiots so much, why are you passing up a chance to wipe them all out? You'd have immense power." John answers, "Oh yeah, that'd be great. I'll end up like you prick. God, you're hopeless. You think I'm putting on an act, eh? Man of mystery, pretending to be Joe Average, right? I don't suppose it occurred to you that it might be the other way around. I'm happy with my life I've got, thanks." The vampire starts to take offense. He starts thinking about killing John for his disrespectful answer. The vampire asks John, "What's so good about being real then? Can you tell me? You seem very sure of yourself, you little mortal bastard. So, I'll tell you what. If you can tell me why your ordinary, piss-boring life is better than mine, you can walk out of here alive. And if you can't, I'll cut your throat and drink my fill and leave you half alive forever." John answers, "Easy. Can you go for a walk in the park and hear the birds singing in the morning? Can you kiss a girl and know she loves you? Can you go out and get pissed with your mates? Oh, I can. And just so we're sure who's better off, why don't we sit here together and watch the sun come up in an hour or so?" Well, the vampire becomes enraged. He yells for John to get out of here. As John walks away though, the vampire issues a warning saying that Constantine's luck won't last forever. If he doesn't claim John, someone else will. As John walks away, he thinks to himself, "Home to Kit now. I hope she won't be too busy. I think I fancy another 3 days in bed." Hellblazer issue 51, Counting to 10. John Constantine's day takes an unpleasant turn when an old friend of his named Jerry Monahan barged into his flat, claiming to be possessed. So John performed an exorcism on Jerry. But then things went awry when Jerry, in the middle of the ordeal, soiled himself. Now we see John stuck washing Jerry's clothes at a laundromat. John, he is frustrated by the looks of the people in this laundromat. They all look like losers. Despite his irritation, John acknowledges that Jerry, for all of his faults, is one of John's few remaining friends he has left. Most people in his life tend to leave him, whether friends or lovers. So while waiting in this laundromat, John is approached by a pair of elderly women who strike up a conversation with him. They comment that John looks like Columbo with his, long jacket. The old women explain that they come here every night. They're always here by 10. They must look like permanent fixtures here by now. One of the women in their group used to work here a few years ago, back when it was a fruit and vegetable shop. The women also say there's usually 4 of them in their group, but there's only 3 now as one of their friends died, a woman named Flory. Flory, who was getting up in her old age and could no longer live an independent life, had to move in with her son named Clive. And Flory did not like living with her son, and eventually she committed suicide by jumping off the balcony from the 12th floor. Despite Flory being dead, the girls tell John, "She'll be here though. She always is. We're always here by 10 o'clock. In fact, Flory's usually the first one here." One of the other old women say, "Well, don't forget her leg. It's bound to slow you down a bit, isn't it? Breaking your leg like that?" "Yeah, that'll be why she's late." John tells the woman, "Yeah, you can't get far without him, can you?" John thinks to himself, she believes every word of it. She really thinks her friend's gonna shuffle her way up in here from the local bloody mortuary. Poor cow. As John continues to sit in this laundromat, a creeping sense of unease begins to set in, culminating in a mysterious phone call. The phone rings and a man in there picks it up and tells John, "The phone, there's someone on there for you." The voice on the phone tells John a whole bunch of weird, cryptic, apocalyptic poetry, taunting John and questioning who he is hiding from. John is pretty disturbed by this phone call. John, he then sits back down, and his mind returns to his friend, Jerry Monahan, who he helped earlier. Jerry isn't just an unlucky victim of possession, but an occult thrill seeker. See, apparently Jerry had been hosting not just one demon in his body, but nearly 70. Jerry, he fed off the chaoticness of it, an addictive high of demonic infestation inside of him. John, he was a little pissed because his friend Jerry came to him and asked him to exorcise a demon, but he didn't tell John he actually had 60 or 70 demons inside of him. John wouldn't have been as annoyed if Jerry told him the truth, but Jerry just told John there was only one demon inside of him. So when John did the exorcism, expecting there to just be one demon in there and instead there was 70, well, it was a real frickin' mess. So John walked out and left Jerry to it. John thinks to himself, "I'm no sadist, but I'm not gonna sit around while they run through him and watch them unravel him from the backbone down. He can sort it out himself. I mean, who knows? Maybe he's recovered already. But I don't want to know any more of it. I've had enough of this crap to last me a lifetime. If he wants to play with fire, fine, but he can leave me out of it." As the night progresses in this laundromat and as John waits for his laundry to finish, the laundromat takes on an increasingly eerie atmosphere. A dog begins to aggressively sniff at one of the elderly women, and the butcher shop window next door mysteriously shatters. The elderly women there in the laundromat say, "Ah, that must be Flory, making herself presentable before her return. She fell 12 floors. She's come a long way. She'll want to make herself look decent." John begins feeling a rising sense of dread. He fixates on the pub across the street. He's convinced that if he can just get there, he'll be fine. But before he can make it that far, John catches a glimpse of something truly horrifying in the butcher shop window. It appears that Flory, the dead woman, is there, covered in blood. John, he ignores it and just walks down the street. Flory finally arrives in the laundromat and greets her friends, and her friends welcome her. They say, "Hello, love. We knew you'd make it. We brought a coat for you. It's one of mine, but it should fit you all right. It'll do till you get home anyway. And then we'll give that son of yours a what for." So the old women are vowing to their friend to help her get her revenge on her son that perhaps didn't care for her properly and led to her suicide. John, he continues stumbling outside. He's overcome with nausea and he vomits in the street. Just another night of horror in the life of John Constantine. Hellblazer issue 52, Royal Blood part 1 of 4, The Players. On New Year's Eve, a male prostitute named Mickey Foster offered a man his company for a price. In return, the man, who was possessed by a demon, slit Mickey's throat and left his mutilated corpse in the cold, where a drunken woman stumbled upon it. The drunken woman screamed for a full 2 minutes before fainting. Meanwhile, John Constantine has been in an unusually high spirits lately. He wakes up beside his new girlfriend, Kit Ryan, and he gets dressed, and he heads into the street with a rare smile. Life has been good lately. Elsewhere, a man named Sir Peter Marston, however, is far from pleased. Sir Peter Marston appears to know who killed this male prostitute, Mickey Foster, but the only man who can help him is the last person he wants to deal with. Sir Peter Marston needs John Constantine. Worse yet, John is never easy to find. After spending all morning searching Camden, Marston finally spots him, or so he thinks. As Marston approaches, the figure he thinks is John morphs into a street dealer and offers Marston some speed. Moments later, the real John Constantine appears, smirking. He had cast the illusion just to mess with Marston. Marston, he weathers John's sharp insults and gets to the point. There has been a murder, and it's in both of their interests that John look into it. John, already irritated after hearing about the brutal killing earlier, is reluctant, but Marston warns him if they don't act, more bodies will pile up. Marston hands John his business card and arranges a meeting for later that day. As Marston returns to his car, he realizes that his keys have mysteriously vanished. Courtesy of John, he took them. John, he had planned to flush the keys down the toilet, but Kit persuaded John otherwise. She reminds him that he's been staying with her for nearly a week, and she asks if John intends to move in. John, he playfully considers it, but Kit lays down a condition. She'd love to have John move in, but she doesn't love his supernatural baggage, the ghosts and ghouls that follow him. John is worried about this as well, but the two of them make a pact that at the first sign of trouble, she won't hesitate to kick John out. Elsewhere, the killer that is possessed by a demon is searching for his next victim. Only the man with the demon in the head is kind of fighting with the demon. He doesn't want the demon in there, and he's trying to remember his own memories, but the demon's causing havoc on his brain. The man, though, he still has some memories of a life, an identity. The demon, however, only has his hunger. It doesn't care who it kills, only how much suffering it can draw out. And the demon has learned how to make its victims stay conscious as it strips the flesh from their bones. As the man possessed by the demon is killing his latest victim, the victim seems to recognize the man, as the man is apparently famous. The victim, as he is dying, screams, "Wait a minute! I mean, you're him! Holy friggin' Jesus! You're..." Before the victim can finish his sentence, the demon in possession of the man kills the victim and brutally strips the body. Later that day, John meets Sir Peter Marston, who leads him to a place called the Caligula Club, an exclusive and depraved playground for Britain's elite. John has never heard of this place, and as he enters it, he is repulsed at what he sees. As they walk through the club, Marston explains that the wealthier and more powerful a man, the darker his vices. Marston shares a story that 5 years ago, a journalist infiltrated the club and secretly photographed everything, but when he was caught, Marston convinced him it was better that these perversions stayed in the club rather than spill out into the public. The journalist burned his own film just before Marston put a bullet in his head. To prove the club's depravity, Marston makes John watch as two half-starved cats are locked into a box and forced to fight to the death. John is disgusted, but Marston presses on, leading John into a room where something far worse has taken place. A major summoning. John studies the room, and he sees that two guests that participated in this summoning are dead on the floor, and apparently the third guest, who was a prominent figure, survived, but not intact. He is possessed. This is the killer that we've seen take some victims earlier. John, he already knows what's coming. He is the one that's expected to hunt and exorcise this demon. Before John agrees to do this, as it is in the greater good of England, John wants to know, who exactly is he dealing with? Marston hesitates to tell John. John insists, saying, "Don't be shy, Sir Peter. You can tell me." Sir Peter then explains who the prominent man was that got possessed by this demon. He says, "He is considered above reproach. He is loved and respected both here and abroad. He is a very prominent member of the royal family." So it turns out a member of the royal family, actually the Prince of Wales himself, the heir to the throne, has been killing people as he is possessed by a demon. John to this says, "Oh good, I think I'm going to enjoy this one." Hellblazer issue 53, Royal Blood, part 2 of 4, Revelations. Sir Peter Marston, having already stolen the police report on the latest killing, shares its details with John Constantine over breakfast. He warns John against leaking any of this to the press once this situation is resolved, unless he fancies dealing with some very unpleasant consequences. Marston has also rounded up 3 of the prince's close acquaintances, each as depraved as the Caligula Club's usual clientele. John, he questions the acquaintances, and they deny any direct involvement in the occult ritual that summoned the demon, and eventually went on to possess their friend. John tells the group of them, "Yeah, well, obviously you're not the closest of chums, but I don't want this spreading. You'll have to do. Having a little party this evening? Don't go far, boys and girls. I'll need you then." John, he begins to head out, but he is intercepted by an unexpected guest, the possessed prince's younger brother, and next in line for the throne after the brother. This other prince demands to talk to John. They discuss. The prince, he is snorting cocaine while they talk, and he then lays out a request for John. He wonders if John could, sabotage the exorcism when he tries to perform it, in order to ensure his brother's demise and secure his own place in the line of succession. John, he rejects this ask. And then, as they're talking, John subtly swaps the prince's next hit of cocaine with the cremated remains of the prince's uncle. The prince snorts it up, not even really noticing. The prince tells John, "I strongly advise you to reconsider the offer." John to this says, "And I'd strongly advise you to keep your eyes open because you've just snorted your uncle's ashes." John, he leaves. Meanwhile, out on the street, the other possessed prince kills once again. And deep inside the possessed prince's body, a fragment of his former self clings to the desperate hope that he can regain his memories and maybe break free of the demon's grip on him. Sensing a flicker of rebellion, the demon entity inside the prince tightens its hold, forcing the possessed prince to commit yet another brutal act of violence. John, as he makes his way home, manages to shake off spies from both Marston and the young prince's camp, and John returns back to Kit's flat. While John is there, Kit briefly returns home to grab her portfolio. She is preparing to impress an American publisher with some of her illustrations. Kit asks John about his latest case. John briefly comments, "Oh, it's nasty stuff." Kit spies some of the documents John is looking at, and she says, "Oh Christ, I don't want to know. Don't bring it here with you, okay?" John, he throws his papers to the floor. John tells Kit, "I wouldn't let any of this shit ever hurt you, Soon as I even got a hint that you could be tangled up, I'd drop it like a stone." Kit then tells John that she's given their recent talk some more thought, and she wouldn't mind if John moved in permanently. She then teases John that domestic life might ruin his tough guy image, but any illusions of Constantine's hardened exterior shatter when she reveals a sketch of him asleep that she made, proving that, at least in her eyes, John looks downright adorable in bed. She then teases, "Goodbye, Mr. Cool." Later on, John goes and visits an old contact of his, a man named Nigel Archer. Nigel is a politically radical psychic who fancies himself a journalist, despite never having been published anywhere. Despite Nigel's reluctance to help John convinces him to help him conduct a seance that night. So later that night, John gathers the corrupt aristocrats that knew the prince, and he also has Nigel with him, as well as Sir Peter Marston. And with Marston's help, John has procured the corpses of the 3 demons' victims that were slayed recently. John is going to use them to lure the demon entity's attention during the seance. So, the seance begins, and the spirits of the corpses of the 3 of the demon's victims are summoned, and they are not pleased to be disturbed. But the return is enough to draw the demon into the open. Constantine confronts the demon. He says to it, you're under your jurisdiction. You're punishing the innocent, but you're supposed to be down in hell with the damned. The demon answers, I was called. John responds, oh sure, and you get to have your fun, but you owe them, chum. You killed these three, and you owe them something in return. Their flesh for your name. Tell them your name. The demon to this says, a man who knows the rules. Very well. The demon somehow communicates to the three souls its name, and then the demon disappears. But the three souls in the room, having learned the demon's name, begin going apeshit, and they try and escape. Constantine yells for Nigel to keep them in the room and make them say the demon's name out loud. Nigel explains it's not just the name, it told them something else, something awful. Nigel then turns to the souls and says, come on, just tell us once and you'll be free, tell us. Finally, the three victims' souls in the room answer. They say the demon's name is Calibraxis, the Lord of Blades, butchered the Devil's Court. He's been here before, killed here, stalked through the alleys with a knife, and used it long ago. Centuries back, a long autumn of fear and splashing white chapel, a bloody crimson making hell on earth. Finally, the souls of the victims are free to depart and they escape. In the aftermath of these events, John and Peter Marston discuss. John explains that they have the demon's name now, and names are very important in the demon exorcism business. All they have to do now is look up the right ritual to trap the demon. John also reflects on what the spirits said. This demon, this Calibraxis, was the same demon that possessed the famous serial killer, Jack the Ripper, in the late 1800s. Hellblazer issue 54, Royal Blood, part 3 of 4, The Good Old Days. The prince is still struggling to remember who he is, much to the frustration of the parasitic demon Calibraxis, who is encompassing the prince and forcing him to kill for days. The prince's human body is failing under the strain of consuming so much human flesh, and Calibraxis, ever disdainful of human frailty, recalls facing the same problem with his previous host, Jack the Ripper, back in Whitechapel many years ago. Elsewhere, John Constantine shares a drink with the medium Nigel Archer, and John tells Nigel the true history of Jack the Ripper. In the 1800s, Prince Albert got a commoner girl pregnant named Annie Crook. Queen Victoria found out and went apeshit, and felt that they had to cover it up. The man to do the cover-up was named Sir William Gall. Gall would end up being Jack the Ripper. Gall sliced out a part of Anne's brain and confined her to a loony bin. And when some of Anne's friends tried to blackmail the government with what they knew they did, Gall killed a lot of them. Here's the thing though, Sir William Gall, he didn't have the balls for murder himself. So, him and his friends had themselves a little ritual and summoned up Calibraxis and trapped and bound the demon into Gall. So then suddenly, Gall had the balls to do anything. And that is when he went on a murder spree, killing everyone that he needed to shut down the blackmail threat. And when he was finished, he was thrown into the nut house. And then when he died, Calibraxis took Gall down to hell as a souvenir. John's friend Nigel, after hearing this story, can't believe these revelations that John is telling him. Nigel, he is eager to expose this scandal to the world. He says, we have to let the people know, the newspapers and so on. We can bring down the monarchy with this, the government, the system. Nigel, he wants to take this story to the press, as he fancies himself a journalist. But John quickly dissuades Nigel, saying it's more important they stop the killings than bring down the government. So Nigel agrees with John for now. Elsewhere, Calabraxis grows increasingly irritated as his host is trying to resist him. In a desperate attempt to hinder the demon's control, the prince tore out his own fingernails and knocked out his own teeth, refusing to make the killing easier for the demon controlling his body. Though the prince cannot access his own memories, the demon's memories are starting to open up to him, and the prince recalls a seance from the night before, and he recognizes 4 of the attendees, but remembers only one name, Sir Peter Marston. So the prince starts to realize his own identity, but before he can act, the demon takes over control again and violently slams his head against the wall. Later on, John arrives at Kit Ryan's flat. He has a suitcase in hand. He reminds her that he's moving in, and she playfully rummages through his belongings. But her mood sours when she discovers a parchment paper hidden among John's clothes. John admits that it is tied to his occult dealings that he's working on, but he promises to keep this part of his life separate from their home. Though reluctant, Kit lets it go, and they retreat to the bedroom. Now, the parchment paper that John has is no ordinary relic. It is a page from a book called the Grimorium Verum, which was a tome that John acquired from one of his old and now dead friends from the Newcastle incident, Ben Cox. The parchment paper details the summoning, binding, and exorcism of demons, and that page is specifically for Calabraxis. John unfortunately only has the exorcism and banishment pages for this particular demon, but he knows there is more out there, and he hopes it will be enough to rid the prince of Calabraxis without ending in his own gruesome death. Elsewhere, Sir Peter Marston secretly meets with a man named David Hezlet. Marston knows that once the killings stop, Constantine will be a liability and will need to be gotten rid of. For now, though, they need John to end the bloodshed and exorcise the demon, but afterward, John won't be necessary. And that is where this David Hezlet comes in. To that end, Marston arms David with a pistol. And soon after that, John and the psychic Nigel arrive. Marston informs John that 2 more victims have been found since yesterday. John, he vows to put an end to the killings, though saving the prince will be another matter entirely. Meanwhile, Calabraxis, the demon, has had enough, and the demon decides it is time to eliminate John Constantine, who seems to be coming for him. Calabraxis is fully aware that John's death would send shockwaves through hell, and potentially end the world as the first, second, and third of the Fallen would battle over John's soul and potentially lead to Armageddon. Calabraxis, though, he doesn't care, as long as he gets his revenge. So Calabraxis and his host makes their way to the Caligula Club where the others are. When they arrive there, they begin massacring and killing many people. Elsewhere in the Caligula Club, the chaos outside draws Peter Marston away, and while they are away, John rifles through Peter's desk, and to John's shock, he discovers that Marston also has pages from the Grimorium Verum, just like he did. And not only that, Marston appears to have more of the book than John does. John deduces that Marston was involved in summoning the demon in the first place. As John is about to go and confront him, a blood-curdling scream echoes through the halls. When John runs outside to see what the commotion is, the possessed prince with Calabraxis inside is standing over the body of various mutilated corpses. The possessed prince then pounces on John and sinks its teeth into John's flesh. Darkness takes over as John falls unconscious. Hellblazer issue 55, Royal Blood Part 404, Dog Eat Dog. John Constantine regains consciousness after being attacked by the possessed prince last issue. John was saved by David Hezlet, who shot the prince off of John. It was kind of ironic because it was the very weapon he had intended to kill John with. We see the possessed prince with Calabraxus inside of him is pinned to the floor with 2 knives stabbed into his palms. Peter asks John to retire with him to his office, where they can talk further. It's quieter there. While they go to talk, David Hezlet begins to take care of some secret business. When Peter and John talk, Peter threatens John and says, "Look, understand this. Once you've returned that thing to hell, you will forget all of this. I'm a very powerful man, and the royal family's position must be protected. So if you even try to expose this affair, any newspaper editor who doesn't laugh you out of his office will find a governmental top-secret notice shoved in their face, forbidding them to publish." While this is happening, David Hezlet sneaks off to murder any other loose ends that were also there at the night of the seance. He finds everyone else involved and shoots and kills them. Back in Peter Marston's office, John and Nigel hear the shooting outside. John correctly deduces that it's probably Hezlet killing any witnesses. Marston ignores what John's saying and just orders him to begin the exorcism immediately while he goes and speaks with his associate. So as Marston leaves this office unattended, Nigel and John discuss. They are trying to figure out how they can avoid being murdered too once the demon is dealt with. And given the evidence they've found here in Marston's office, John is pretty sure that he is the one who summoned Calabraxus in the first place and bound him to the prince. Although he can't figure out why Marston would want to do that. Nigel asks, "So what are you gonna do?" John answers, "What do I always do, Nigel? Screw them before they screw me." He knocks on one of the other doors in the Caligula Club, and he finds the prince's younger brother there. John knocks him unconscious with a fire extinguisher. The prince seems to be into BDSM, so John rifles through the prince's desk and he retrieves a pair of handcuffs. Before John can continue on with his plan, though, he returns to Marston's office, and he demands to know why Marston intended to put a demon on the throne of England. Is Marston a lunatic? Marston answers, "No, Constantine. I'm a patriot. I wanted to restore the monarchy of this country to its rightful power. I wanted a king who would have the iron will to rule absolutely, and believe me, he was willing. He'd be backed by the military and advised by me. There would be no parliament, no opposition, no radicals, no liberals, no thinkers, no immigrants. There would simply be the rulers and the ruled, and we could do anything." John responds, "You're talking about putting the thing that used to be Jack the Ripper in charge of us? The bastard eats people, you head case." Marston to this says, But Constantine, what has our royal family ever done except feed off the blood of the people?" John to this says, "Jesus Christ." Marston lets out a sly smile. John continues, "You're a lunatic, Marston. You haven't a clue what you're dealing with, and you can't control it, and you don't know how to banish it. You couldn't even pick the right bloody demon, could you?" Marston responds, "I admit, it was a disappointment." John answers, "I'll bet. Calabraxus, the devil's butcher, and you thought you could control it. Look, Marston, I know I'm a dead man as soon as I've sorted this out for you, but I'll do it anyway, cause I'm not having a blind demon loose on Earth. And I know the next thing you're gonna do, you stupid piece of upper-class shit, is go looking for another demon and then you're going to try again. God damn your black soul to hell." They all make their way over to the pinned prince on the floor, with Calabraxus inside. John had his associate Nigel draw an arcane circle around the prince. When Marston enters the room, John begins the ritual. He recites the spell and then he waits. He tells the demon inside the body, "Don't piss me off. You heard the spell, you know the rules. Get out of him." The demon Calabraxus is forced to leave the prince's body, so he exits through the prince's mouth. and is now floating in the air. Marston now screams for John to send the creature back to hell, but instead, John, he grabs those handcuffs he took earlier, and he chains them to a pipe, and then he attaches the other end to Marston. Marston starts yelling, "Constantine, what are you doing? Let me go! I said let me go!" John, he then points to Marston, and then speaks to the demon, saying, "Calabraxis, enter him." The demon is at first bewildered. What the hell is this Constantine playing at? Well, the demon jumps inside Marston's body. Because the demon is chained to a pipe, he cannot use Marston to kill everyone else in the room. The only thing he really can do is still get one last meal from his host. So Calabraxis, the demon, begins causing Marston to eat his own flesh. Marston first starts eating some of his arm, and then he starts going to town on his own genitals. This is a Garth Ennis book after all, so of course there's going to be some genital eating. David Hezlet, the man with the gun that was there to kill John, tells John, "Make it stop." Hezlet continues, "I mean it, you bastard, stop, stop, I'll blow your friggin' head off." John, looking at the gun, replies, "You are such a prick, Hezlet. I can see right down the chambers of that thing, and they're empty. You forgot to reload after killing the witnesses." Hezlet attempts to shoot, click, 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 and his gun is empty. John, he quickly unleashes a beating on Hezlet, disorienting him, and then John grabs him and throws him toward the demon. And after a few moments, the demon inside Peter Marston's body begins going to town on David Hezlet as well, devouring him too. Soon, Nigel and John leave to go get some air. Before they head out, they look at the unconscious body of the prince, the one that used to host Calabraxis. The prince is still alive, but not in very good condition. Later on, Sir Peter Marston has finally died, and he awakes naked in hell, hanging from a meat hook. Peter calls out, unsure of where he is. Nearby, another man hanging from another hook responds that he is Sir William Gull, the man thought to have been Jack the Ripper, and also known to be the last host of Calabraxis many years ago. The demon Calabraxis laughs, knowing that Satan will dine on Marston's soul tonight. Hellblazer issue 56. This is the diary of Danny Drake. While riding on the subway, John Constantine overhears a man loudly declaring himself to be a whoremonger. This man is named Danny Drake. John ignores the outburst, just assuming this is a crazy man yelling things. Danny, on the train, continues spouting nonsense. He says, "Out! Let me out! And Daphne found out, just like she found my grimorium, and she called me a shit, a dirty little shit." Finally, the train stops and the doors open and Danny runs out. John, he was listening to this man's yelling, dismissing most of it. But then this man mentioned a grimorium, and that sparked an interest in John, as his friend, Ben Cox, used to have a book called a Grimorium Verum, a notorious compendium of spells and demon summoning rituals. So John wants to know what this man was mentioning that book for. John gets off the train as well, and he runs after Danny and catches up with him. John tells Danny, "Oh, I know what your book is. The one that you said Daphne found? All about a very nasty place, and the people who live there, and how to speak to them. Start talking." The man introduces himself as Danny Drake, and Danny invites John back to his home. There, Danny confesses that he is being haunted by his own diary. He had kept a diary for nearly a decade, recording even his darkest secrets, and his wife, Daphne, had left him over his whoremongering, a fact that he had freely admitted on the train earlier. And then after Daphne, he started hooking up with a woman named Ophelia. Ophelia brought him some happiness, so Danny felt like maybe he didn't need his diary anymore, so he burned it. But then Ophelia left him, and then soon after that, strange things began to happen. Danny would be mid-conversation when, without warning, he'd blurt out his most damning secrets. He even found himself confessing the crimes he could have easily gotten away with if he just shut up. The only ones that ever knew these truths were himself and the diary. John, listening to Danny's story, says, "Alright, hang on, so you've told me about your diary and a few daft things you got up to, but where does the magic come into it?" Danny, nervous, says, "Don't you see? The diary is the only other one that knows. It's making me do it, making me say stuff." John insists that Danny start talking about the magic. Danny asks, "Do you really believe in this stuff?" John answers, "Do I ever? Now get on with it." Danny, he then admits, "Alright, well, my house and all my money, my job, all my things, they didn't exactly come from hard work." See, back in university, he dabbled in the occult about 10 years ago, and he sold his soul to a demon named Triskel in exchange for a fortune. John, he thinks to himself, "What do I say to this idiot? The sad, stupid bastard who's fallen for the oldest trick. You never miss your soul until you've signed it away." John tells Danny, "Okay, Danny, I'm going to do a bit of sniffing about. You stay here. Don't go out, just in case you start confessing your sins again." Danny begs John not to leave, but John says, "Look, I'm going to go try to find out about your demon, and then I'll see if it's the one that making you spout about your diary, alright? Sometimes these demons mess you about when you're under contract. They think it's funny. Now sit down, wait for me, and relax." So John leaves to go dig into his own copy of the Grimorium and research this Triskel demon. John, he keeps his occult books at his friend Chaz Chandler's place, as his new girlfriend Kit won't allow them in her flat. So John grabs his Grimorium, finds the page on Triskel, and reads about her. Triskel's reputation is brutal, merciless, and terrifying. But something doesn't add up when John reads the page. Triskel always collects her debts within 5 years. So why is Danny still here? As he mentioned, he sold his soul to Triskel about 10 years ago. Annoyed, John storms back over to Danny's home and starts demanding answers. John begins by saying, "Why aren't you in hell?" Danny's confused. John continues, "Triskel, Danny, she's a greedy bitch. She's famous for it. In fact, she never allows a mortal to keep his soul for more than 5 years. Once you sign the contract, the clock starts ticking. How did you get your extra 5 years, Danny?" John continues pushing Danny, and Danny finally breaks and admits the truth. Danny admits his pregnant wife didn't leave him. He had murdered her and offered their unborn child to Triskel in exchange for an extension on his soul. So that bought him a 5-year extension, but now soon his extra 5 years are running out. Desperate to escape his fate, Danny has kidnapped a baby from Covent Garden, hoping to make another trade. John becomes disgusted. He forces his way into Danny's cellar, where he finds the stolen infant. John grabs the child into his arms and then heads upstairs, and he gives Danny a final warning. John says that if Danny tries to run away from what's coming for him tonight, John will personally make sure that Danny suffers a worse fate. Later on, John returns the baby to the police, and then he heads down to a restaurant and shares a drink with Chaz, knowing full well that Danny's time is up and that the demon Triskel has finally come to collect. Hellblazer issue 57, Mortal Clay. The artist in this story arc is Steve Dillon, and I think it's kind of interesting to see this early collaboration between Garth and Steve because they would end up working together on many other projects in the future, such as Preacher as well as Garth Ennis' various Punisher runs. When the issue opens up, we see John Constantine and his friend Chaz Chandler are enjoying a carefree day. Chaz, in his usual eccentric fashion, suggests donating sperm for $10 a cup. John scoffs at the idea, but finds himself appreciating these absurd moments he has with his friend. Their lighthearted mood takes a dark turn when they arrive at Chaz's uncle Tom's place, only to discover that Tom has died of a heart attack. Chaz is grief-stricken. The two of them spend the afternoon drowning their sorrows in booze. Later, Chaz, desperate for reassurance, asks John, "Hey John, you know about all this stuff, don't you? I mean, you know the truth, not the bollocks the vicars and all tell us. Is my Uncle Tom in a better place?" John, ever the cynic, can only offer a reluctant, "Course he is, mate." John didn't fully believe what he was saying, though. A few days later, at the funeral of this Uncle Tom, things take a shocking turn when, after the funeral, Chaz and John catch a group of men attempting to steal Tom's body straight from the grave. This enrages Chaz, and he charges at these men, forcing John to intervene and help in the inevitable brawl. In the scuffle, Chaz manages to extract a crucial detail from these men. The men are being paid to deliver the bodies to a facility elsewhere, in a place called Stokesley. Before John and Chaz can act on this info, the two of them get knocked unconscious. Later on, beaten and bruised, John and Chaz arrive at Kit Ryan's place. Kit is less than thrilled to see them in such a beat-up state. After giving them a proper scolding for getting into trouble, she makes them both some tea and listens to their story. Chaz, he is determined to uncover the truth and avenge his uncle. So John and Chaz agree that they will team up and handle this together. Meanwhile, up at this mysterious facility, we see what they are using all of these dead bodies for. A man named Dr. Amis appears to run some sort of laboratory where they test out weapon ballistics on fresh corpses from graveyards. Dr. Amis seems to take great pleasure in watching the bodies get torn apart by his ballistic experiments. Later on, we see John and Chaz traveling to where they believe this secret facility is collecting the dead bodies. It used to be a government research center, and it provided jobs to everyone in the town, until a private company bought it out, shutting everything down. So all signs point to this being their destination. To reach the facility, John and Chaz have to park their car and then endure a grueling hike up a nearby hill. As they are walking up the hill, they start hearing gunfire coming from the facility. When they reach the summit of the hill, they spot the compound, while they are not sure how to find a way in. But then they see a truck approaching the facility nearby. So John and Chaz run after the vehicle, and they jump into the back of the truck. At first, they're excited because it seems like they are making some progress, but then to their horror, they realize that they just climbed into a truck filled with corpses. Disgusted, Chaz leaps out of the back of the truck, only to be immediately captured by other armed guards. John, he quickly gets captured as well. Watching from his office, this Dr. Amis smirks, satisfied. He now has two very much alive test subjects now to experiment on. Hellblazer issue 58, Body and Soul. John and Chaz find themselves in a room talking to this Dr. Amis. The doctor reveals that this facility acquires corpses illegally, more cheaply, and in far greater numbers than official channels would allow. Now that Amis has John and Chaz, and they have disrupted his operations, he sees no reason not to test his high-velocity projectiles on their living bodies. Before Amis dismisses them to send them to their holding cell, he questions Chaz. He says, "Mr. Chandler, your driver's license gives your name as Frank William Chandler, yet earlier I overheard your companion refer to you as Chaz. Since your name's not Charles, I'm curious as to why it has been shortened in this manner." So we will now get the answer to the mystery of Chaz's name. Why is he called Chaz when his name's Frank? Chaz answers, Well, it's after that bloke who managed Jimi Hendrix. He was called Chaz Chandler, so my mates called me Chaz too because we got the same last name. Kinda like a joke, you know what I mean? Dr. Amis has no idea who Jimi Hendrix is. Later on, when John and Chaz are sitting in their holding cell, awaiting for what seems like certain death, the spirits of the desecrated corpses grow restless within the facility. One tortured soul, unable to bear the torment any longer, seeks out John. The soul manages to fly its way over to John's holding cell with Chaz, and he screams in anguish and explains his plight before finally exploding in a blinding flash of light. John shields both his and Chaz's eyes, and then John realizes the horrifying truth. The spirits here are trapped, unable to pass into the afterlife because their bodies are being systematically destroyed. Among them is Chaz's uncle, Tom. If John and Chaz do nothing, these souls will be lost forever. Chaz, he reflects on what John told him last issue. John knows a lot about the afterlife, and when Chaz asks John if his uncle is in a better place, John lied to him, as his uncle is actually in this horrible place here. So Chaz seems a little bit annoyed that John shielded him from the truth. John realizes that this is what is going through Chaz's head, and he tells him, "Shit, look mate, I'm sorry I didn't know, but we can maybe save them, right? I need that knife you're carrying in your shoe." So John, he has a plan on how he can maybe save these souls and also free both him and Chaz. So John borrows Chaz's knife, and then he carves a ritual circle into their cell wall. And then John cuts his own hand, and using his blood, he fuels some magic. John's goal here is to summon something called a soul storm. The spirits in the facility become empowered, and they rise in a furious swarm, and they are unleashed upon the facility in a vengeful frenzy. Dr. Amis, expecting nothing, is suddenly surrounded by these enraged souls. Yet, instead of being fearful of them, he is overwhelmed by their ethereal beauty, and he realizes the magnitude of his sins. He never truly grasped the suffering he was inflicting. As the souls begin to depart, Amis becomes desperate to go with them. One of the souls reaches out a hand towards Dr. Amis, and Amis, with tears streaming down his face, says, "Thank you." Back in John and Chaz's holding cell, there is now a hole in the wall, so Chaz and John are free. Chaz asks, "What, was that them, the souls?" John answers, "They're free now, they can go wherever they're supposed to." Chaz questions, "And my Uncle Tom?" John answers, "Him too." Chaz, he then seizes a machine gun from a stunned guard and begins storming his way through the facility. John follows behind. John pauses outside a testing chamber where a scientist, tearing up, says, almost hypnotically, "He liked it, Dr. Amis, he liked it. I wondered why he did it, you know. Same tests over and over again. He just loved it. He loved seeing the bodies shot to pieces, butchering them like they were animals." John replies to the man, "Hey, well, it might have been worse. He might have been shagging them. That'd be disgusting." Elsewhere in the facility, Chaz, determined to finish things up, bursts into Dr. Amis's office with his gun ready. When he is in the office, he sees Dr. Amis is already a broken man. Amis has shoved his fingers deep into his own eye sockets. Amis is just repeating, "Thank you, thank you, thank you so very much." Chaz, he hesitates to pull the trigger. So instead, he beats Amis to death with the butt of his gun. Finally, once Chaz finishes getting his revenge, he joins John outside. John is a little worried that his friend Chaz might hold what he said against him. I mean, John didn't know that Chaz's uncle was not in a better place. He never imagined that this is where his uncle had been sent. But when Chaz finally emerges, he seemingly has forgiven John, and he simply just asks John for a cigarette. The two of them still are friends. Hellblazer issue 59, Guys and Dolls Part 1, Fallen Woman. In her garden in hell, in a place called the Soul Garden, the succubus Chantanelle peacefully picks some flowers. We first met this succubus in the Dangerous Habits story arc. Her and John Constantine were friends, and John requested her assistance in helping him not to die from cancer. John also hinted that Chantanelle owed him for some sort of past favor, although we never learned what that favor was. We will in this story arc. Well, Chantanelle, she couldn't help John, but she referred him to the Archangel Gabriel, aka the Snob. Anyway, so Chantanelle now is picking some flowers until Hell comes knocking. The first of the fallen, aka Satan, aka the devil, approaches her, and she instantly knows his intent. Chantanelle is terrified. She makes a desperate escape. She leaps across the infernal divide, leaping from hell to London, and then she crash lands in the Thames River. Meanwhile, elsewhere in London, John Constantine is growing a little bit restless in his relationship with Kit Ryan. John, he's just worried about all of his supernatural enemies coming for him. There's the first of the fallen, there's the king of the vampires, potentially others. There are just too many debts to settle. Unable to shake this feeling, John steps out into the night, assuring his half-asleep girlfriend that he's just going for a walk. Back in hell, the first of the fallen storms toward the demon Triskel. He is annoyed that Chantanelle evaded him. The first of the fallen says, "One of your succubus bitches has defied me, hag. Your sweet darling Chantanelle, who you told me would help, has fled from hell. She knows the enemy, you said. Feel free to use her against him, you said. Where is she?" Triskel tells Satan, I never knew how she met your adversary. I didn't know how it mattered. I didn't know how they were so close. Well, she'll probably be with him then." Satan is not happy to hear this. He says, "Constantine, no, it's too soon." The first of the fallen is not ready to take on Constantine again, not after the humiliating defeat he suffered recently. As dawn breaks, John is continuing to walk outside, and he finds some unusual footprints in the mud, leading into the sewer. John follows them, and inside he finds Ellie, aka Chantanelle. He finds her trembling and desperate for help. Still bitter over past betrayals, John sarcastically says, "Why don't you seek out the snub?" John tells her to do this just as she once told him when John was dying in the Dangerous Habits story arc. Chantanelle, she isn't here for favors. She's here to warn John. The first of the fallen wants John dead, and he intended to use her to do it. The first of the fallen wanted information, and Chantanelle was worried that if the first of the fallen questioned her, she would be forced to tell him how her and John first met, and the favor that he did for her. And then, when he found that out, he would tell her Queen Triskel, and Triskel would destroy her. And Chantanelle says she wants to live. With a sigh, John drapes his coat over her shoulders and leads her out of the sewer. He's going to help her. In hell, the first of the fallen continues to grow angry. Triskel tries to reassure the first of the fallen, saying, "My love, this should surely be your time of triumph. The fallen angel, Lucifer, is long since gone, and hell is yours." So at this point in the Sandman comics, Lucifer Morningstar has abandoned his post in hell and has quit and has left. So now the first of the fallen is kind of in charge. The devil explains he still has his wretched brothers to deal with, though. Triskel responds, "Well, that can't be helped, but surely now you will celebrate. Live as only the devil can. Squeeze every drop of agony from the damned and rule. Why waste time on some paltry mortal trickster like Constantine?" The devil is angry by this comment, and he grabs Triskel and tears her face from her skull body. Triskel screams, "My face! Give it back to me, my lord! Please, give me my face!" The first of the fallen vows that hell will not know peace until John Constantine is torn apart. Back in London in a hotel room, John and Chantanelle talk. Chantanelle shares that the first of the fallen is far more dangerous than Lucifer ever was. Unlike Lucifer, who was bound by his archangelic nature, the first takes pleasure in suffering. When Lucifer fell, he found that someone was already there, the first of the fallen. They say that he'd been there since creation began, that he was first to be, and the Redeemer threw him out of heaven for daring to think for himself. Lucifer had been greatest of the archangels, and he could never match such power. But the morning star is gone, and now there's no one in the first of the fallen's way. John, he acknowledges the oncoming danger, but reminds Chantanelle that she still owes him, and one day he will collect. Hellblazer issue 60, Guys and Dolls, Part 2, Nativity Infernal. John Constantine remembers how he first met the succubus Chantanelle in 1984. So we have a flashback now to 1984, a few days before Christmas. John is at home, and he has a desperate knock at his front door. John opens the door, and he sees an unusual couple before him, a pregnant woman and her partner. This wasn't just any pregnancy, though. The man was an angel named Tally, and the woman was Chantanelle, a succubus. So two beings, one from heaven, one from hell, had mixed, and they now have a child. The consequences were dire. By the way, this whole concept of heaven and hell mixing and having a baby is something Garth Ennis would do again later on in his Preacher series. So how did this relationship come about? Well, Chantanelle had seduced Tally on a dare. Tempting an angel was the ultimate challenge for a succubus. But instead of mere lust, Tally's virtue turned Chantanelle's desire into love. And now both celestial factions were after them, and their unborn child could be the spark that ignites a holy war. Now initially John had no intention of getting involved in this situation, but after some well-placed flattery, he agreed to help. John had his friend Chaz Chandler drive the couple to a hidden location where John set up protective spells to shield them from demonic detection, so those in hell could not figure out what was going on. John he then left them, seeking more insight, so he paid a visit to the Whitechapel Hospital for the Criminally Insane. There, John talked to a possessed man named Clive Peters, who was possessed by a shit demon named Gout. So John, he talks to this Gout there, and he says, "This fine romance must be stirring up the good and proper down there, huh? Who's on the case, Gout?" So John, he assumes that hell knows about this child and that they are hunting Chantanelle. But Gout has no idea what John is talking about. The demons of hell have not learned anything yet. So John, he leaves and he returns back to the safe house. And when John arrives, he hears the sound of agonized screams. Not from an attack, but Chantanelle has gone into labor. Now, neither John nor Tally had any idea how to deliver a baby, so they kind of left Chantanelle to bring the child herself into the world. Now, John's protective spells had protected Chantanelle and Tally from the gaze from hell, but there was no such protection to stop heaven from interfering. So all of a sudden, once the child was born, the 7 archangels descended. One of these archangels was the snob, Gabriel, whom we met several story arcs ago. So these 7 archangels descended and slaughtered the angel Tally on the spot. And then as Chantanelle gave birth to the baby, the angels took the child and vanished. John could only hope that they would kill the child quickly. although a part of him also hoped that maybe it had survived. So in the aftermath of that, Chantanelle had returned to Hell, playing as if nothing had happened. But from that moment on, she owed John. Back now in the current day, the memory of that night still haunts John. It haunts Chantanelle as well. And now Chantanelle wants John's help again. She says to John, "If you get the devil off my back, what then? What are you going to want me to do? Or rather, what would you like me to try?" So Chantanelle is asking for help again, and in payment, she's offering, some seduction. John, surprised, says, well, you must be really desperate to throw shit like that on me, love. But John, he refuses her. There's a war coming between him and the First of the Fallen, and he needs to be ready. Meanwhile, in Hell, the First of the Fallen senses whispers of rebellion. The demon Nergal claims ownership of Constantine's soul. Nergal was a demon that John faced off with in the Jamie Delano part of the Hellblazer run. The First of the Fallen won't stand by this, though. So as punishment, the First strips Nergal of his demonhood, leaving him mortal and subjecting him to torment. And now, with vengeance on his mind, the First of the Fallen can't shake the image of John Constantine flipping him the bird, a defiance that will not go unanswered. The First of the Fallen says aloud, "You are my enemy, Constantine, my adversary, my devil." Hellblazer issue 61, She's Buying a Stairway to Heaven. Down in Hell, the First of the Fallen grows impatient with Triskel as he searches for Chantanelle through the looking pool. The First of the Fallen knows that she is with Constantine, and that alone is reason enough to act. John, on the other hand, has plans of his own. He acquires stolen surgical instruments for a grim purpose. John then tracks Chantanelle down at a bar. She is wary. She knows John will help her, but she also knows that he'll want something in return. Likely, he'll expect her to aid him in taking on Hell itself. John joins her, and he offers Chantanelle a solution to her problem. How she will get free from the First of the Fallen hunting her. John warns her, though, that she won't like the solution one bit. Down in Hell, through the looking pool, the First of the Fallen finally spots Chantanelle, and he begins to move in. We see at an abandoned house where Chantanelle's cursed child had been born years ago. The place right now is in ruins, covered in blood, and John steps outside for a cigarette after finishing some work. His hands are stained red. And finally, the First of the Fallen arrives, and he demands answers from John, and he is confused by the scene before them. Where is Chantanelle? John, with a smirk, explains his master stroke. The blood comes from a ritual. He has carved something called a masking sigil onto Chantanelle's very soul, making her invisible to Hell itself. The demon Triskel is impressed by John's work. How did he accomplish such a feat? The only other person in history to do so was Judas, Christ's disciple. Well, now Chantanelle is beyond their reach. And this marks John's third victory against the First of the Fallen. A hat trick. He has outsmarted the demon 3 times, and by the rules of Hell, John should be free from Hell's grasp. If you best a demon 3 times, there is the threefold defeat rule, and the demon is bound by supernatural law and must leave that person alone permanently and return to Hell to be punished for their failure. We saw this way back in Jamie Delano's run with the demon Nergal when John bested him 3 times. Enraged, the First of the Fallen moves to strike John down, but their ancient bargain forbids it. John, ever the provocateur, taunts him, saying, "That's 3 times I've whipped your ass, sunshine. Round here we call that a hat trick." Triskel yells no. John continues, "It's okay, love. He knows the score. He does me in now and he'll be eating shit for the rest of eternity. The first of the fallen is furious. He wants to fight John, but John tells him, "You're not ready yet, are you? But you're working on it. Soon, I promise." John walks away, and when he is by himself later, he's disappointed in himself. He forgot to flip him off again. John says, "Shit, I forgot to give him the finger." Elsewhere, Chantanelle examines herself, amazed that there isn't a single scar from John's work on her. She reflects on the enigma that is Constantine, sometimes an open book, sometimes a complete mystery. She then reflects on the sigil that is now on her soul. It will destroy her if she ever returns to hell. So she can never return to hell again. She will have to adjust to life on Earth, which for a demon like her that actually loves a lot of the parts of hell, it's not so great being on Earth. Chantanelle goes and sits in a park, and a young boy approaches her and tells her, "You're very pretty." And then he leaves her, and Chantanelle reflects on that. Maybe Earth isn't such a bad place after all. Eventually, John joins her in the park. He asks, "How you feeling?" Chantanelle answers, "Weird, like an itch I can't scratch or something." John, he then tells Chantanelle his plan. He talks about war, seduction, betrayal, a fall from grace, and revenge. Chantanelle thinks John's plan is insane, but despite everything, she agrees to help him carry it out. Back in hell, the first of the fallen punishes Triskel for failing him, and then he resumes his vendetta against Constantine. The first of the fallen is soon visited by agony and ecstasy, two demons we saw much earlier in Jamie Delano's run. They came when Nergal failed 3 times to punish him, and that is what they are here to do with the first of the fallen. They remind Satan of his 3 losses to Constantine. They say, "We heard of the incident with Constantine, Lord. It is your 3rd defeat at his hands. According to the law, he is now free, and you are meant to suffer instead." The first of the fallen does not care of the rules, and he decapitates agony and ecstasy. And then he returns to his scheming, because one thing is certain, Constantine will still be his. He'll wait and plan, and then he'll make his move, and he'll haul that little bastard screaming all the way to hell. And with this, we end Volume 6 of John Constantine Hellblazer Bloodlines. Alright, so that was Volume 6. Let me go through my thoughts on the various story arcs in this one. We kicked it off with a 2-parter involving these ghosts in this bar, and I thought it was a fun time. We see some of John's furthering relationship with this Kit Ryan, John hanging out with Chaz, and we also get some kind of this intriguing story of this couple that are ghosts, and they are getting their revenge on the people that burned down their bar by taking them over and brutally killing them. And you know what? It was really fun, and John, seeing him try to investigate this and solve everything. So yeah, that was a good time. We had the Lord of the Dance story arc, which was a great little Christmas tale in a way. John hanging out with his ghost, making him feel better about being forgotten, because even though he's sort of been replaced by Christmas, still everywhere there is drinks and people being merry, so the Lord of the Dance is never really truly forgotten. So yeah, fun little tale. And you know, the Lord of the Dance is going to come back and be one of John's friends in future issues. So, so yeah, it's fun. We had the King of the Vampires issue where we are introduced to him, and I thought it wasn't bad. You know, it's funny because in Preacher, Garth Ennis liked to explore some stuff with the vampires too, so you can see some early parts of him doing that here. So yeah, that was a fun one, and the King of Vampires is going to come back, and him and John are going to have another confrontation later on. So it was good stuff. We have the Counting to 10, the one where John is in the laundromat. That one I'm a little bit weaker on, although it still had some pretty good moments and was a little bit creepy with this old woman that was dead, but she sort of came back to life in a way, and she's covered in blood, and she's doing all gory, creepy-ass shit. So not too bad, not the best, but not too bad. So then we have the 4-issue Royal Blood story arc, and this one was great. I love demon possession, exorcism storyline, and this one up to the stakes where we have this secret club and these rich aristocrats and this demon that John has to exercise, and the involvement of the Royal British line in there too. So really fun time, and John really getting to work. You know, it reminds me of the very first story arc in Hellblazer with Papa Midnight and John exercising a demon that possessed his friend. So we're finally getting more of that in here. So it was a really solid time. Okay, you had the Diary of Danny Drake. That was a solid one-shot of this guy that sold his soul to a demon, and he's trying to get out of it, and he's doing that by sacrificing some babies. And he's asking John for help, and when John figures out what he's doing, he's not going to help that guy. So yeah, that was a solid one-shot. Then we had a two-parter where we have Steve Dillon coming on the artwork, where we have these ghosts and this guy that is testing these ballistic gunfire on this range and watching dead bodies explode. It was okay. It was an okay story arc, but I like to see some of that relationship between John and Chaz and talking about the afterlife and seeing John get to work, saving ghosts and these souls and getting revenge on an asshole in that storyline. So yeah, not too bad. And then we sort of ended off with a 3-issue arc that furthers the rivalry between the First of the Fallen and John. And yeah, pretty good. We're up in the stakes. And I liked the backstory where we learned where John and Chantanelle first kind of met, and John helped her out because she was with this angel and they had a kid. So yeah, pretty cool storyline there. So overall, I honestly thought all of these issues were pretty good. There wasn't really a clunker in the bunch. And that's pretty impressive for 15 issues to be so consistent like that, where I think I was never bored. Every single issue hit and was good, which is great. So I'm going to give this volume an 8.5 out of 10. Really solid stuff. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be back, I think, in 2 weeks with the next volume, although we'll see. If I can get it done in 1 week, I'll be back next week, but maybe in 2. But I'll see you at some point in the future for Volume 7.